All right, it's great to see that a lot of you are non-members, and so welcome to this event, and we hope that you continue following up with us and attending other events as well. We have a conference coming up on May 26th, and we hope you will attend. It's going to be incredible, and it's going to be hybrid, so you can join virtually or in person if you are in Washington, D.C. And on that note, I also see that a lot of you are joining from outside of the United States, which is incredible. So thank you for being here today. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Han to introduce our event today.
Thank you so much, and thank you, SID-W, for hosting this session on proactive fundraising. Today, we're going to go a little bit in depth on the topic of proactive fundraising. I will, of course, explain what it is. We have two great guests here, Dina and Bora, of two amazing organizations, and they will introduce themselves a little bit later on in this webinar as well. Let me share my screen. Today, proactive fundraising. I will give a quick introduction about what it is, but I will first, of course, introduce myself. That's where I will start. Then I will hand over to Dina and Bora to introduce themselves and the organizations they represent. And then afterwards, we will have a short discussion, and we have room for questions from you as well on the topic of proactive fundraising, or if you're interested in what the organizations are doing, of course, feel free to ask questions about that as well. And then we wrap up. We have 1 hour in total, so we keep it short. Of course, there's much more to discuss, but we can always do that after today's session. Quick introduction about myself. My name is Valk. I am the founder of HVFC. I've always worked as a fundraiser for different organizations. But 7 years ago, I set up a company called HVFC. And it's a consultancy that helps you to do good better. That's how we summarize it, by focusing on your funding, to diversify your funding, make sure that you get different sources of funding. So you're more in control of your own destiny, your own future. We help you to have more impact in your programming, and we help you to increase the capacity of your teams. We do it globally. We started in the Netherlands, but currently we are active worldwide. We have an office in the US, but we also have people based in Copenhagen, for example, or even in Singapore. That's very short about who we are and a little bit about me. But that's not why you're here. You're here to talk about proactive fundraising. So I would like to just give a quick introduction on the topic, and then we zoom in a little bit more in depth by looking at two cases from two great organizations to see how they are implementing this in their work, and what it brings them and what challenges that might bring them as well. So proactive fundraising sounds cool, but what is it? Well, we say it's the opposite of reactive fundraising, what you probably know. So in reactive fundraising, what you do, you look at what the donor's wishes are, and then you submit a proposal, and you hope that they recognize themselves in it, and you get the funding to do pretty much what they ask you to do. And that's what you are maybe experiencing in responding to RFPs of USAID, or maybe with other funders. The donor dictates the focus of where the money is going. However, in proactive fundraising, you create your own opportunities, and that means you're also in control of your own future. And that's a different ballgame. You don't go to the websites of the funder and see if they have a goal. No. Instead of responding to goals, we actually listen to them, we talk to them, we build trust, and by doing so, we develop a program together that can help us to realize our goals together. And of course, then they are the funder and we are the executor of the program. That's still the division of roles, but we bring both agendas together, and that's a crucial step. I will zoom in on what that means in practice, of course, but and the conclusion of this is that there are a lot more opportunities. It's not only the one funder that is publishing its tender or its call online, but pretty much the whole funding landscape out there is a possibility. And in that, we try to build relations, and as long as we deliver, And as long as they deliver, from their point of view, the funder, there's no reason to stop the collaboration. So normally we see that these partnership lasts a lot longer than the average relationship in reactive fundraising, and therefore it's also cheaper. So we come back to that. I mentioned that there are a lot of opportunities when you look in proactive fundraising. It's not only the grants.gov that we need to scan, or maybe the websites of the European Commission or the World Bank. No, pretty much all funders, so foundations, maybe corporate foundations, maybe bilateral, multilateral funders, we see opportunities there. Why is that? Because they have a mission, they have a vision, they have ambitions that they want to realize, and in that they are looking for partners, and we could be that partner. So we need to evaluate where the right focus is for us. There are too many fish out there in the sea, so we need to prioritize. That's, I think, the key lesson in proactive fundraising, because it's relationship building, it takes time, so we need to be very focused. So that requires that we need to have knowledge about 3 segments. One is, of course, our own organization. That's obvious, but still this is something that we see in practice that organizations are struggling with. We need to know exactly what we want to achieve in the future, not only how much money we can raise, but also where do we want to spend it on. We need to know on how we can do fundraising, how we can build relations with funders, crucial. Not everyone is very proactive, so some are a lot safer behind the computer, they like to type proposals. That kind of knowledge is crucial to have. We also need to look at how we want to spend our money and what kind of funding fits us, etc. So a long list of questions that you might want to answer that gives you a little bit of understanding of your organizational capacity. This sounds like the easiest step in the process, maybe it is, but this is something that we see organizations struggling with. And then before you know it, they try to approach funders and that is just outside of their league, or too big or too small for them to handle. So it's it's worthwhile assessing your own organizational strengths and weaknesses. We of course also need to look at the donor demand. So we need to see what are donors interested in, and this is something you are probably all very experienced in exploring funding databases, talking to funders, listening to funders, go to events where funders speak. It's also important to see if we can predict the future a little bit. And there it becomes challenging, of course. We can look back in time to see what the priorities of the funders are. But we need to listen to the funder to actually see if we can predict what they're going to fund in the next 2 or 3 years. And those 2 worlds we need to bring together. And there are tricks in how you can do that, but it's a lot of listening. That's pretty much the key word to that. Not selling, but listening. The third dimension that you need to assess is the outside world, so the others that are active in this field, the others that are talking to the funders. So your competition or maybe potential partners. This is also something that you might have some experience in already, but keep in mind we're now entering a global funding market, and it means that we might compete with organizations that we're not so familiar with yet. And why is it so important to understand what the competition is doing? We need to know where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are. We need to see if what we want to sell or explain to the funder, if it actually is as unique as we think it is, or that maybe others are doing more or less the same thing. So it's crucial to see where we are in this field. Where these 3 worlds overlap, obviously, that's where we should find the right focus. So something that is in line with our needs, with something that we can handle, that really contributes to our larger goal, where donors are interested in or are going to be interested in the near future, where there are not so many others that are doing the same thing. That's where you have your ultimate spot. More often than that is that we see organizations in the light blue area where there is overlap, but not the full overlap. Just a few examples is what we see happening a lot is where there's overlap between the donor demands and there's not so much competition, but it's actually a little bit outside of our scope. This is what we see happening a lot, and there's nothing wrong per se with doing this. But just an example, you have a project in a certain country, project is ending, you had one big funder, so you have a serious problem. You need to close the operations in the country because there's no funding, or you accept funding for a project that is actually outside of your vision, outside of the mission of your organization, maybe even, but you do it anyway because by doing that, you can continue your operations in the country, and in 2 years or in 3 years, you can get the funding for projects you're extremely excited about. So we call that bridging funding. And we see a lot of organizations doing this. In itself, understandable, nothing wrong with it, as long as it's a clear decision from your own organization to accept this funding as bridging funding. And before you know it, you drift away from your mission and your vision, and you are doing opposite things or at least different things of what you were founded for. And it's also what you see happening quite a lot with organizations. Once you know these three dimensions and you know which funders and what might be an interesting approach, it's good to put that in a basic strategy. And this strategy is based under clarity on what you want to achieve as an organization, what kind of funding you are looking for. And out of that, we can do a donor mapping step. And in the donor mapping phase, what you do is you try to bring to small the big funding opportunities, the numerous funding opportunities out there. There are too many, as I mentioned. There are so many fish out there in the sea. In the US, we have 100,000 foundations. In Europe, we have an equal amount of foundations. There are dozens of bilateral and multilateral organizations. There are too many. So we need to narrow it down by doing some proper desk research. See, where do we expect the best opportunities? You see that the shape of the funnel is in the form of a funnel. So you see that once you've finished this step, you have fewer leads than when you started. Well, next phase is that you're actually going a little bit more in depth and try to see if you can predict the future, as I was just saying, by looking at the trends. So if we look back a few years in time in the funding history of this foundation, and then see if we see actually it's going up or it's going down. We can look at social media of this organization, see are they slowly talking about different topics, for example. It really helps. But in this phase, we're also going to see how can we get an entry point at this organization, because it's about personal connections. People give to people, we often say. So even with these big foundations and even with bilateral organizations, it's still the people that are going to say yes or no to your organization. So we need to see who are those people that are going to say yes, and how do we get on the radar of these people. And that's what we do in the donor profiling phase. So we look at who are those decision makers and how can we actually start building a relationship with them, which is the next phase. So in the relationship building phase, we actually reach out to the funder, we talk to them, we listen to them, crucial step in that. And there's another one-time meeting that we have with them. Now, this is genuine relationship building, and this can take a long time. This can take, a year and a half maybe, before there's actually trust being built to the level that they are actually going to invite us to submit a proposal, or they tell us way in advance that something is coming and ask us feedback on the tender that they are going to publish. So we can actually influence that step a bit. So this relationship building takes a lot of time, and it takes touches, as we call it. So, and a touch is a contact moment. Can be a meeting, can be meeting them at an event, can also be that we respond to an article that they've published and share it with them, and so they know that we can be a diversity of contact moments, but we need to have touches with them, and the more the better. Then only we reach the request for funding phase and the implementation phase. So only then we're going to submit proposals, because we knew it was coming. We are invited. We know that the chances of getting a yes or a no are extremely high. So often in tender procedures, it's especially if you don't know who is going to respond, might be that you have a 1% or less in getting the funding if you don't know the donor very well. Might be a little bit higher if you have a good relationship with the funder, but it's then only with one funder. But we want to have a group of funders that are going to fund us in the future. And we still want to keep a success rate of 40–50% when we submit a proposal. So hence all the steps before. And what we see I'm almost done. When we see in reactive fundraising is that most organizations are focusing on the top of this pyramid. So they have a few funders in mind. They focus on USAID, they focus on State Department, and maybe one or two other funders. Okay, that we understand. And then they scan for opportunities, form consortia, write proposals. That's pretty much what they do. And if you look then at the fundraising strategies or the business development strategies, they often have only two indicators. So number of proposals submitted and success rate. Those are the two things they often measure. Those are two things that you have hardly any control over. We don't know how many calls a certain donor is going to publish. We don't know the amount. So we are stuck with political decisions. Once you get a new president, for example, policies might change again. Who knows? And then you're stuck. And success rate, yeah, it depends, of course, on how good we are and how flexible we are as an organization. The closer we stick to our vision and mission, the more difficult it gets to be successful in business development. So those are two indicators that you often see, but those are not the easiest ones to work with, if you ask me. While in proactive, we have indicators on all these levels, and we break it even down in smaller steps. So you can actually see, are we on track? And these are things that you actually have control over. And this is something that can really help you to get structurally in control of your fundraising future. This is pretty much the funnel, and this is what I think is very important. So a few things to summarize. One is you need to be extremely focused, and that is what you do by doing desk research. This is something you can easily do from behind the computer. This may be something you already have some experience in. We are focusing on long-term funding relationships, not one-time funding successes, and then we go for the next one. That is extremely expensive. No, we want to build sustainable, long-lasting funding relationship with the funders. So that is something that we're going to benefit for many years. And of course, it's about pitching and about selling. The main step first is to listen. I always advise when you have a meeting with a donor, don't start talking about who you are. Listen first to what their needs are and how they introduce themselves. And based on that, you change your story. So listening is more important than telling. Good. That's it for. Now I've. 3 more things, but I will skip that looking at the time. So there was a lot from me, a lot of sending. The opposite of what I just said that I should do. I should listen first, but well, I also need to learn. So I'm going to do this and start listening because we have 2 great panelists here that are going to tell us a little bit about their own organization and how they work. And we, of course, will also zoom in on how they do their fundraising and see if we can see how this proactive fundraising actually works in practice. Maybe they think it's actually a bad idea to do. Let's see how that works. And there are 2 great people that are going to talk to you. One is actually from the US, Bora, from Artwork Project. She will explain what it is and how it works. And the second person is Dinah from Watch Out Holland. In this order, we are going to start. So Bora, if you want to take over from me, then and introduce a little bit about our works, then we take it from there.
Great. Thanks, Han. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to be able to share a little bit more about Artworks projects and what we do. So Han, if you wanted to kick off our slides. So Artworks Projects is a Chicago-based human rights advocacy organization who leverages visual tools, so visual advocacy tools in particular, to increase awareness on some of the most pervasive and grave human rights abuses. On the next slide, you'll be able to see a projection of the exhibition that started it all for us. So Darfur was launched in 2006 by AWP's founder, Leslie Thomas. Leslie was very compelled by a picture of a young boy that was very similar in age to her own son at home. And she just felt something calling her she had access to a community, was a trained architect, knew some people who happened to work in visual photography, but also documentary films, and thought, what if we put together a campaign? She pooled all these resources, and from the network-based approach that she was able to take, Artworks Projects was also born. So there were a number of various funders that she was able to approach through the network, but then also some friends who connected her to photographers, where they were able to pull together this beautiful exhibition that ended up being a traveling installation where you see these projections. So this is right in New York City. They took the projection or the installation to about 23 different international cities. And we've been able to continue to build exhibitions or produce exhibitions like this in partnership with a number of different kinds of humanitarian aid organizations, funders, and then also photographers such as Lindsay Dario, Marcus Gleasdale, Ron Haviv, and the list goes on. So on the next slide, where we've been able to focus our work a little bit more, you'll see here is that what we do is we're creating these exhibitions meant to amplify the stories of the people and the communities experiencing these human rights abuses. So really our focus is also survivor victim-centered storytelling, making sure that we're able to really embed the work within context. There are stories of both pain, but also hope, right? In what it is that these individuals are experiencing. Around then our visual advocacy tools, we really strive to then pull together more content, whether they be through panel discussions, other kinds of activations within university campuses, working with different organizations to also activate or reactivate some of our work within their contexts. So being both a service provider, but then also a convener of these kinds of conversations. 7 years ago, then just based off of some of the learning and from the network impact that we've had with the different photographers we worked with, the board wanted to really launch then a fellowship program to make sure that we could also cultivate a new generation of storytellers. So we also have then a Emerging Lens Fellowship program. It's now in its 7th year, and are soon to launch a documentary filmmaking program. And really the idea here is to cultivate, again, voices from within communities so that these individuals can tell their own stories. And then also from our learnings as well, being able to produce toolkits, resources, making sure that as individuals go into the space of documentary photography and filmmaking, that they're also going in trauma informed, that they're not re-traumatizing the individuals that they're working with or the populations that they're working with. So really striving to work with different kinds of think tanks or university centers or research hubs that can work with us on producing these kinds of all-encompassing tools that talk both about, the aspects of transitional justice and where then storytelling and this kind of community engagement can be impactful in that process. So those are the key focal areas or programmatic areas of AWP. Next slide, I think is just an image of one of our exhibitions in Washington, D.C. on migration from, in particular in the US, of course, Latin America and Mexico. The border there is a topic that continues to be on our news dockets as well. So this is an exhibition that we were able to host in line with I believe a session that was happening on Congress to talk about our border regions. Next slide. So over our 15-year period as an organization, we've been able to present our work on 5 continents in 35 countries and with about 225 partners. And we are really privileged to be able to work with over 200 documentary photographers and filmmakers. And again, much of our work, because we are a small team of 4 part-time people as well, could not be possible without the network and the collaboration that we have with these individuals. Next slide. This is our timeline, just to kind of give you an idea of the array of issues or topics that AWP addresses through our work. And then also here you can get a glimpse of the different kinds of partners we're able to engage in the execution of our work. So again, really spanning the gamut from, Sudan all the way into, then more recently, we had a 18-month engagement with the community of Flint, with a young photographer who we worked with through our Emerging Lens program. She is from Flint, Michigan, and really wanted to tell the story about the impact of access to water and how this community, especially in a time of COVID, was then doubly impacted by the fact that both already living in a community where health outcomes are not on par with the national average due to environmental factors, then COVID on top of that was really something that hit them hard. But she was able to document the resilience of this community and how they took matters into their own hand to really self-advocate and be able to pull resources. That just kind of gives you a glimpse. Oh, and then this is a very pixelated picture of a workshop that we had several years ago in our gallery space in Chicago. And then I think you can move on to the final slide here. And then this is, again, just a glimpse of our Emerging Lens program, giving you an idea of the different kinds of stories and communities impacted by the work that at least our photographers have been able to put out there to the world. I think that's it.
Almost.
Yeah, and then very recently, very exciting for us. So in our 15-year anniversary, which was just last year, the idea of also expanding our reach a bit more and being a little bit more present in a city where we could convene with some more influencers and leaders in the human rights space, we decided to launch a office residency at The Hague. So this is our very recent event. Just happened last Friday, April 22nd, at the Hague Humanity Hub. So that's where we will be basing some of our work out of Europe. And we're able to do a preview of an exhibition with one of our photographers who is covering refugee stories in Ukraine. And so we hosted a conversation with 2 photographers, a Ukrainian photographer and curator of Odessa Photo Days, and then Will Sands, our photographer, who we commissioned to work on this exhibition called Fleeing Mother Russia's Fury. So we were able to host then a panel discussion about the impact of visual storytelling and the importance of really tapping into the ecosystem to ensure that we're able to effectively tell the story, but then also ensure that we're also impacting some change.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it's a nice bridge, you getting active in the Netherlands to the second panelist of today, Dinah of Warchild. Can I hand this over to you?
Yes, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Dinah Tolikite and I'm heading our program Partnerships and Grants Department at Warchild Holland. We're different areas of work in terms of fundraising, partnership building, and also quality assurance of our programs comes together. I have also invited 2 colleagues of mine, Frederike and Helene, to this meeting, who are team leads for the teams that are working with foundations funding and government funding. Yeah, we can go further. My presentation is built, we didn't talk about that before, but it's built around also the 3 pointers that also Han was talking about: organizational capacity, competition partnerships, and donor demand. But I would like to start first with the demand that is out there. And that demand is 160 million children. that live in high intensity conflict zones. And we all know they are dealing with a lot, and 1 in 11 will have a moderate or severe mental disorder over a certain time. Maybe we can go to the next one. Of course, there is many children, and War Child Holland is not, well, a medium-sized organization. We do have high ambitions, but we need partners to help us in realizing them. And this is like a graph that, you know, shows how exponentially we would have to grow if we were to reach these children on our own. And this is quite a steep growth, which would be kind of unrealistic to realize. So there we say we have the expertise and others have the reach. And there are so many NGOs out in the world, in different countries, that are working in similar areas, and we are really reaching out for forming partnerships to work on those in those areas together. And next one, please. These are the countries where we work. That's our presence at the moment. As you probably know, there are also 2 other War Childs. One based in UK and another one in Canada. So we collaborate also closely with each other. And this is a mix of the countries where we are present. Next one, please. So what do we do as War Child? We work to improve the psychosocial well-being of children living with violence and armed conflict. And so this is our expertise, speaking about organizational capacity. We work in the area of mental health and psychosocial support, also in the area of education and child protection. What does that mean? The next one, please. What do we actually offer? First of all, our approach is a care system. It's not as different single products or single interventions that we offer, but we look, what does a child need? How can we make sure that we have everything that needs to achieve the impacts in these 3 areas, and they can be all interconnected. So we look at the care services, and these care services are especially our expertise. If we speak about, again, organizational capacity, but also competition and for partnerships. How are we different from other organizations, and why should communities or donors choose us? What do we bring to the table that is better than maybe other interventions out there? And these are really evidence-based interventions that we are seeking. We have an in-house, quite sizable development and research department that develops these interventions that can be also based on best practices or interventions that have already been tested out on the ground, or interventions that we test, for example, from World Health Organization or our own developed. But the factor that makes us differ maybe from other interventions is that those are proven to have impact. Around those, we also develop different tools that enable these care services to have even higher impact. And also, we take care of the care quality. We measure it through attendance, competence, and fidelity. If we can go to the next. So what kind of interventions do we really offer that are evidence-based? Those are also divided, for example, over education, child protection, and psychosocial support or mental health. But they can be also implemented all together. because they support each other. For education, we, for example, have a core program that is for teachers to support them with their well-being. When you work with children affected by conflict, it requires different type of strengths and different type of set of skills to work with these children. And sometimes teachers in these areas are themselves affected. So this program helps them to deal with this. We also have an EdTech solution, which is called Can't Wait to Learn. It's a self-paced curriculum-based learning in numeracy and literacy. It can be offline, tablet-based, and we are now, for example, working together with the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine to develop the curriculum for groups 1 to 4. Based on this Can't Wait to Learn program, but this will be accessible online so that children in Ukraine, but also outside refugee children can access this program and can still continue their learning. For child protection, we have different programs for nurturing families themselves, for also supporting them with psychosocial support solutions. And we also have a SID program, which is really focusing on child protection and community ownership, building their capacity to detect what is really needed. For specifically psychosocial support and mental health, we have IDEAL, EASE, and Team Up programs. IDEAL is increasing resilience and psychosocial well-being. EASE is reducing psychosocial distress amongst young adolescents. And Team Up is psychosocial well-being through movement-based activities. Almost all of them are, for example, now applied in our response to the Ukraine crisis. But of course, we are applying it in different countries in the Middle East, in Africa, and in Colombia, where we also very much focus on peace building. And then you have, of course, enablers, like I said, certain tools like Stretch and community case detection tool that help us in applying these interventions. And of course, for quality standards, we also have We Act type of program for assessing competencies of people working with children and youth. This is, in short, the whole package of what we have. And of course, there are different new ideas and based on the needs, like also developing a new program on disinformation that affects children and youth too. And there's recently published reports by UNICEF on this. So we are really looking at the needs and deciding what kind of interventions are needed. And we are filling up, let's say, our package with whatever is needed. And then we are looking at the same time at the donors who can fit these needs in terms of financing. And we believe also if we have really good quality interventions and a very clear approach, something really tangible that we know that for sure will deliver impacts. We see that it really attracts quickly donors, and like with the response to Ukraine crisis, we were simply approached by the donors. Can you do this? Can you do that? We also won Jacobs Prize in 2017 for the best evidence-based interventions. So that also says quite a lot, and it does help in your proactive fundraising with different donors, governments also for influencing, because then you have proof, you have evidence-based impact measurement also. to demonstrate what is really needed, what they should be including in their, for example, development cooperation policies. So yeah, that in short. And of course, together we can change children's lives. And I would like to invite everybody to join us in that.
Excellent. Thank you, Dana, and thank you, Bora, as well, for these great introductions on your organizations. I will stop sharing my screen because it would be excellent to zoom in a little bit on the topic of proactive fundraising by learning from you. And of course, the floor is open for questions from the audience. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or to type it in the chat, and we can take it from there. Otherwise, I have plenty of questions prepared as well, so that will be fine. I was just wondering, when I was listening to both of your presentations, that from a fundraising perspective and a big war going on now, and that is very visible, and also a lot of donors are active on that. That donors must be lining up to work together with both of your organizations. Is that the reality at the moment? What, Dana?
Yes and no. I think because there is so much going on, right? And I think this is something that we hear just about the field in general is human rights, aid, international development. These are all crowded fields, and there's a lot of information to parse through. And so oftentimes what we're finding, even in moments like this, are that the organizations that already have the big brands, right? The capacity to execute and move very quickly on initiatives are the ones that we will see kind of rising to the top. And so for us, and I really appreciated actually Diana even mentioning this in her early on in her presentation, it's kind of just being aware of what you do and what you're capable of, and where to link up then on the outreach and the impact that you know that your organization might not have right now. And so for us, it was important to listen too, and to see what is happening then. Let's check in with our board members. Let's check in with staff to see how they're even feeling. So of our team of 4, 2 live in Europe, 1 in Berlin, and 1 is in France right now. And 2 of us are here in the Midwest, 1 in Wisconsin and 1 in Chicago. And each of us are responding and reacting to the war in a different way. Let's do a pulse check with our donors, but also let's just kind of figure out what other people are doing in the field. And very quickly, we were then, through that, able to link up with a former photographer or a collaborator of ours who had gone to Eastern Ukraine, in fact, in 2014 and 15, and did an exhibition with us. So we checked in with Will to see, how are you, and how are your past collaborators who are embedded within the Ukraine dealing with this? And what do you think is something that we can add value to without crowding even already a busy conversation, right? And so we were able to link up with then also a former funder of ours and supporter, UNHCR, brought to them this idea to take Will back to Ukraine to link up with his original fixers from 2014-15 and really help draw out more of the nuanced story, right? So in the news, we're seeing a lot of immediate bang, bang, this is war photography, this is what's happening, and that's necessary. But also, this is also a war embedded deep within context and nuance, and right? And so that's something we can offer then that's different. So let's take a little bit of a slower approach. Let's maybe re-unearth some of the research and some of the documentation that he covered in 2015, re-exhibit some of that, but then also build some work as a continuation of that storyline. And so we'll be working with UNHCR then on drawing that out a little bit more about just kind of refugee movements and right to asylum, which we're also finding out about little by little as Ukraine emerges as well, right? There are undocumented individuals who are stuck at the borders, who cannot flee, who are underdocumented, if you will. And so being able to touch on some of these other stories that are just below the fray is where we can offer value. And so that's something that we've been able to then really leverage and work with our donors or supporters or even other photographers who may want to add on to that story. So that's kind of a little bit of our approach, right? It is all the things that each of you are saying. It's the listen first, really make sure that we are assessing what's happening out there. Let's not overcrowd an already busy field, but let's add value. Value though where we know we have expertise, value where we know we can do a good job with what we have. And let's look at what the partners who have supported us before, because we know we work well with them, and let's see what can happen from there. So that's something that will now become a longer term engagement with both the UNHCR and now a group photography show.
Great, thank you. Yeah. And how is that for War Child, Dinah? In this phase?
Yeah, I think my answer is also yes and no. It depends really a lot on the events in the world, really globally. We have seen, we very often say, okay, fundraising is often donor driven, but donors are also driven by the events. And we have seen with COVID, all the funding went into that. Now we see with the war in Ukraine, all funding is going there. While in other countries where conflicts are still ongoing or happening, funding is diminishing. And then, it's difficult to get funding for those conflicts.
Yeah.
Also, it's really sometimes with donors is they come to you when they need you, but at the same time you really need to be yourself very proactive, and that means sometimes, like you said, also long time relationship building, but also long-term investment in participation in different platforms and raising awareness for different areas of work. Climate is, of course, now a very, speaking in fundraising terms, hot topic. And you see many foundations also changing their strategies and focusing on that. But you miss sometimes this more global coordination of not forgetting the forgotten crises.
Yeah.
And that's always a challenge for organizations that are focusing on certain areas. But it's also a challenge for organizations that are focusing much broader, let's say, on advocacy issues, tax, finance, these type of issues. It's always a stretch, and you need to find the best way and approach on how to do that. But first of all, you of course need to have those elements in order to be able to promote your work. Yeah.
And I was wondering, especially in the types of in the type of work that both your organizations are doing it. Sometimes you need funding urgently, but in the same time you're also trying to bring in a sustainable flow of income for the future, right? So you must have like two strategies almost in your departments where you think about 5 years from now, but also next week, right? And that's often what we see in proactive fundraising, is that organizations say, oh, I'm super excited about it, let's do it because it's cheaper and it gives a lot of more stability. And okay, it takes maybe a year and a half or 2 years before we start harvesting, but let's go for it. But we also need, next week, we need funding coming in, right? Or next month or in a year or whatever. But those two things are biting sometimes. So how do you deal with that in your organization?
Yeah, that's a constant battle, especially for organizations that work in conflict-affected areas. Yeah. Because there you deal a lot with humanitarian funding, and humanitarian funding is always short-term.
Yeah.
While you also need to work on the stability of the organization and the continuation. And the aspiration of our organization is to scale our interventions so we can reach the children that need our help.
Yeah.
For that, there's the whole process. How can you come to scalable interventions? And there's innovation that needs to happen. There's also, as we call the missing middle, how you make you turn your intervention into a scalable one where you have early adopters. How do you find these partners? How do you find donors that want to invest in that? And only then you can speak about sustainable long-term funding. And that's something that was possible in the past. And for example, also with the Dutch government, where you had the block grant and you were awarded and you could spend it on the work that you thought was needed based on the needs and your research. For that, donors unfortunately have turned away from that. There are a couple of foundations that are coming back to this and are also promoting this, but we are not there yet. And this is sometimes think what is that's why I'm losing so much time on this, going back and forth. We need to build also more trust in each other, donors and NGOs, and the trust was lost somewhere in the meantime, and I think we need to go a bit back to this, and you need to have really good implementation of your programs to also build that trust. Yeah. So we can talk about, let's say, the fundraising side, but the implementation and what you achieve is equally important to show the quality of your programming.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's yeah. The fundraising part is relatively easy. To convince someone to actually fund your organization is it's difficult, but it's that's the easy part. But the spending part, and actually, especially in crisis situations, of course, it's difficult to execute projects in the right way possible. Probably a lot of things go wrong. So you need to be on top of it and be the right organization that is getting the impact that the donor is looking for, and also the impact that you have quite big ambitions, I saw in your presentation. So you need to be on top of it, and only then you can convince them to continue funding you in the future and partner up with you. Yeah.
Maybe to add to this, it came to my mind. I don't know how it is in the US, but in Europe, it's also very much a lot about risk sharing and securitizing the whole development cooperation sector, which makes our work really difficult, and also a lot of discussions about localization and decolonization. The aspiration of the governments and the donors at the same time to promote this agenda while not really giving the tools for that, and just kind of demanding. So there's a lot of work to be done on that side if we really want to make impact. The risk sharing comes not only between, let's say, international NGOs and local organizations, but it's also risk sharing by the donors themselves and by the governments themselves, and helping to develop those tools or giving those tools and thinking out of the box by themselves. Why do we need in every and each NGO, for example, safeguarding expertise? Why can't it be offered on a more, let's say, country level or let's say donor level? All the programs that donor is, for example, funding. They also work with multi-year strategies in a certain country. Why can't this be offered on the embassy level, for example, or something similar? There are so many possibilities. So it's, I think everybody needs to take their own responsibility for that. Then we will be much more effective and less conflict will be needed.
Yeah. Very good point. Very good point. Yeah. Hey, Bora, I have one slightly different topic question for you, because you mentioned in your presentation that you just opened an office in The Hague, in The Hague Humanity Hub, and because you have ambitions to spread the word, of course, to find new partners, get new funding in, expand the work of AWP. So I was wondering, how do you measure your progress in partnership building and funding? When can you call it a success, in a year or 2 years from now? How do you measure?
We've been discussing that as a team as well quite a bit. And it's also been something, even in our 15 years as an organization, we took some time to review our past work. What are some of the kind of the impact points, if you will, that we've been able to demonstrate in our work? And it's harder to pinpoint. And so for us, what we've decided, what really is a true measure of the value of our work, are the longstanding relationships that we have and the recurring projects that we are able to continue to support or build out because of those longstanding partnerships. And so for us, it'll be in Europe. We're going to base it off of, this first year, where are we able to then maybe take some of those connections that we already have with these organizations that are more global and really leverage that in Europe and make sure that we can use that as a launching off point and really kind of build out from that. But within year one, we do have some goals to try to reach a certain number of kind of start to look at audience reach, but then also our partnership reach, right? So for now, we're not looking at dollars, but we're certainly looking at the partners who we can leverage more access to then different audiences, different donors, et cetera. But what I wanted to actually go back to really quickly, because I know that we're already at time. So especially in international development, I would say what's really tricky is there is a fine line between impact and marketing too, and especially with what your donors are going to pay attention to, right? So what I have found that we're also working through with some of the issues that we're dealing with, they are hard. So when you're looking for the new donors in particular, or sustained donors even, who are then really stressed by these things that are happening around DE&I and that are happening around decolonization and a discomfort in talking about those things, you have to meet them where they are, and you have to start to identify a common language that you can operate off of, right? Both organizationally, but then with your donor base. And so part of that does require marketing. Part of that does really, right? It's a matter of knowing how to position yourself so that your donors are comfortable with your approach and where you're going, and you want to bring them along on the journey. And so what happens quite a bit then in both human rights and in human rights advocacy and international development, it gets very jargony. That distances you from individuals who are just not as in tune, right? And so that's something that we've also been really striving for, is thinking about our language. How do we contextualize our work? Because we're here in Chicago. So why does a refugee story from Syria really impact me, or how does that impact me, right? So helping to close that gap is something that we really strive for, and is something that we have heard as well, that we need to do better at in order to connect with the everyday individual, but in particular our emerging donors. So while legacy donors, it takes a little bit more work than to work up that six-figure proposal for them, you can start to build also your emerging donor class by way of really closing that gap and finding that common language. So that's something that I just wanted to kind of put out there as a big kind of learning lesson for us on our listening tour last year, as we thought about, what are the next 15 years going to look like for us, and how do we start to build that base? And a lot of that, I think, happens with just building that vernacular and making sure that you are really accessible to your donors.
Great. Thanks for that, Bora. I'm looking at the time. We spent just over an hour, so I don't want to take too much of your time. But thank you all so much for being here, and special thanks, of course, to Bora and Dinah, and the other team members of Warchild for being here. Very much appreciated. I just want to conclude with this. If there's anything that you need from me or from Dinah or from Bora, just drop me a message. You see my email here, and I will connect you to Bora and Dinah. Also, if you would like to hear more about HVFC or about proactive fundraising, feel free to reach out. I will be in Washington next week, so if you would like to have some coffee and go a little bit more in depth on this topic, or like I saw the question from A, like on successes, I'm happy to share a few with you. So just drop me a message, and over coffee or over email, we will share that. But we take it from there. So with that, I want to close this. So thanks again for your time and the contributions, the questions, and yeah, Warchild and AWP. Thank you so much, and hope to see you in person one day soon again. And Sid, thank you so much for hosting this. It was a pleasure, and hope to see you soon again.
Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.